Hey everyone, it's Carissa Wiley here for Pinkfresh Studio. Thanks for joining me today. Today we are celebrating dads and grads in the form of mini Slimline cards, which are perfect for giving cash, just in case you wanted to know. And I thought I would start out by showing you how to make a mini Slimline card base. So I have a piece of letter-sized linen cardstock here, and I am cutting it to 6.5 inches by 6.25 inches. Now, a finished mini Slimline card measures 3.25 by 6.25 inches. And I have to say, the hardest part about making these card bases is remembering which side is your 6.5 inch side, because that's the side you need to score. And it's only slightly longer than the 6.25 size. So I have 6.5 here by 6.25. And along this 6.5 inch side, I am going to score at 3.25 inches. I went ahead and marked my scoring board for this measurement because it makes it a lot easier for me to find it. And I'm just going to use my Teflon bone folder and score at that 3.25 inch mark. Now, I've recently seen some questions about the proper way to fold a scored note card. And when you score, there will be an indented side and a raised side. So this back side is the raised side. It kind of makes a mountain. And this top side has the indented side. And you want to fold the mountain into the card. So the outside of your card is going to be the part where the score line was debossed or indented into the card. That's the proper way to fold a scored card base. And I'm just using my Teflon bone folder to run along that score line and that fold to make it really nice and crisp. And that completes my mini Slimline card base. Now here is a look at how a mini Slimline card compares to an A2 size card. This is an A2 size card on my right hand side. You can see this is a little bit taller and a lot skinnier than that traditional A2 size card, but it's not so big and overwhelming that it feels difficult to fill up. And so I really like this card size. It's also perfect for giving cash or personal size checks, so it's perfect for grads in your life. Now, in the Pinkfresh Essentials release that was released on Monday, there is this great mini Slimline Essential die bundle. And it comes with so many dies. And I've die cut several of these pieces to kind of show you all of the possibilities. And I'm not going to go through them all here. I actually did that on my blog, so if you want to check that out. But I did want to show you these detail dies because I will be using these to create a continuous die cut pattern on my card front and kind of bleeding over onto my card base. These dies actually cut those braided circle details and those dot circle details without an outer cutting line. So it makes it perfect for this type of technique. Now, in addition to those circle detail dies, I will also be using some of the stitched rectangles, and you can see this die set really offers you a lot of possibilities, and all of these are going to be sized perfectly to work with that mini Slimline card base that I created earlier. So you can see the layers, they're just effortless. Now, I am using several different colors of cardstock, and it was inspired by one of the pattern papers from the Pinkfresh Studio Keepin' It Real collection. So I matched up some solid colored cardstocks in my collection, and I will have these linked below. And I am going to create some colored cardstock strips using the Pinkfresh Studio Skinny Stripes die set. Now, I am using both the 1/4 inch and the 1/8 inch size because I wasn't quite sure which size I would use for my card when I began creating this. And I'm going to just die cut both of these dies at once out of each of these colors of colored cardstock. Now, I actually like to use a cardstock that's a little bit longer than the die itself and kind of let it hang out the end of my die cutting sandwich because that keeps all of these strips attached to the original piece of cardstock and they're not kind of floating around. So you'll see when I move this cardstock, they're all kind of stuck in that piece of cardstock and it makes it really easy. I just kind of rip one out as I need it. And now I'm going to take these stripes and apply them to a really lightweight piece of computer printer paper, typing paper. This is actually a scrap from a test that I had to take for work. And so once it was completed, I just cut it up and put it in my scrap pile. And I'm just using some liquid adhesive to adhere these stripes right up next to each other on this scrap piece of paper. Now I am showing you the wider stripes here, but I'm also going to do this same thing with the skinnier stripes. Now, the important thing to remember as you're creating these little striped pieces is that you want to push these pieces of cardstock right up next to each other so there's no gap. You're not seeing any of the white paper behind it through the kind of gap in the cardstock strips. It's really easy to do, especially when you're using a liquid adhesive. And I find it's a lot easier to line these up if you just start out on an angle. Because an angle is much more forgiving than trying to go straight across the cardstock. Now I'm just finishing up my second grouping here of these skinny stripes, and these dies really do make this so easy. You could cut these with a paper trimmer, but I find that beautiful kind of rounded edge that you get from a die to be just really pleasing, and it just kind of finishes off the cardstock so well. Now I'm just using a pair of scissors to trim out these sections of stripes that are all adhered together. And I'm just kind of tilting the blade of my scissors to give this a slight undercut so you don't see any of that paper along the edge. Now I am using the smaller diagonal stitched rectangle from the Mini Slimline Essentials Bundle die set. And I am going to die cut this pattern paper and this set of stripes all at once so that I get that continuous pattern of the diagonal stitching both on that striped paper that I created as well as the pattern paper. So it's going to be kind of continuous here. And to make sure that I am kind of putting this where I want it, I have everything at the correct angle. I'm just kind of lining that up, and then I'm going to hold this die in place as well as that little cardstock strip bundle with a piece of purple tape, and then I can run this through my die cut machine. Now it's important that you know I used a lightweight piece of paper to adhere these cardstock strips to. And that's because I knew I would be die cutting through a couple of layers at once. And if I would have used a heavier weight cardstock, it would have had a harder time getting a clean cut along these edges. But because that's a lighter weight paper behind the cardstock, I was able to cut through the pattern paper and these cardstock strips all at once with no problem. Now it was at this point that I decided I wanted to use those circle detail dies to kind of create a die cut pattern on this card front. But I wasn't necessarily convinced that I wanted it to kind of bleed off the edge and go onto my card base. So you're going to see me just take this die with the pattern paper and run it through my die cut machine. And I get this really beautiful braided circle detail on my card front. Now I'm going to show you both the hard way and the easy way to get this continuous die cut pattern on your card front and onto your card base. And the first way is actually the more difficult way. But I actually think the results of this were a little bit cleaner in the end. So now I'm taking that dotted circle and I'm die cutting it a couple of times from this card front as well. I'm just kind of positioning this, figuring out where I want it, and then I'm going to run it through my die cut machine. And it was at this point, once I kind of die cut that second circle, I was like, wouldn't it be really cool if this pattern was also on the card base itself and you could kind of see through into the card, into the center of the card, and this pattern would be kind of continuous across both pieces. And I kind of toyed with that idea in my head as I did a few of the other steps of this card. So I took that grouping of die cut strips there and I added some foam adhesive to the back, and I'm going to attach this to the card front. And then I have a sentiment here that says celebrate. This is from the Perfect Sentiments hot foil plate, and I used the coordinating die cut to die cut it out. And I used a really cool silver holographic foil to foil these sentiments. And I die cut several plain white cardstock sentiments to kind of stack behind it to give it some dimension. And I have several of these kind of ready to go in my stash, so I just pulled one of those out. Then I decided I definitely have to go through with this continuous die cut pattern onto the card front. So in order to do this, I'm just going to take the die and I'm going to look through the die cut pattern that I already created on the card front and kind of line up the holes that are on the card front with the holes of the die and then hold that in place. Now, as I mentioned before, this is actually the more difficult way to do this to kind of get everything lined up, but I think the results are actually a little cleaner in the end. I'm going to show you an easier way to do this here in just a bit. I held that die in place with a little bit of purple tape and then I accidentally bumped it. So I am just looking back through that card front, looking kind of through the holes of the die to make sure it all lines up. And if it's not like exactly perfect, it's going to be okay. It's going to give you the look that you want. So I added a second piece of purple tape onto that card base, and now I'm going to run this through my die cut machine. Now this card base, as I mentioned before, measures 6¼ by 6½ inches. So it barely fits through my die cut machine without kind of curling up the edges, but there is a little gap on either side of the plates. And you'll notice that my card base does hang out of the plates just a little bit, but it went through the die cut machine just fine. Now, if you have a larger based die cut machine, this would be really easy to do, but just be careful as you're running this through your die cut machine. Now I did the same thing with that dotted circle detail die there. I kind of looked through the card front into the holes of the die and made sure that that all lined up, and then ran that through my die cut machine again. So now I have that continuous pattern on two of the circles here that goes from the card front onto the card base. And it's kind of cool because you can kind of see through into the inner part of the card. Now I attached the card front to the card base using some foam adhesive, and I just added a little bit of liquid glue on the foam adhesive so that I could kind of slide this into place. And that is my first card for today. And that is my grad card. I'm going to finish it off with a little heat embossed sentiment on some black cardstock. You'll see that in the end. And I decided there's an easier way to do this. And so I really felt like I needed to show you that. Now, I didn't do this technique in the beginning because I didn't know that I wanted this continuous die cut pattern on the card front and the card base. But for this second card, I thought I would show you an easier way to achieve this look. And if you already know that you want to do it, you know, it's probably easier just to use this method. So for this method, I'm going to line up my die onto the card front. I'm going to open up my card base, and I'm going to actually die cut through both of these pieces at once. So I'm going to hold my card front onto my card base using some purple tape, and I'm going to leave it in place until all of my die cutting is done. Now, as I mentioned before, I feel like I got a little bit cleaner result with the first method that I used. Because I'm running this double layer of cardstock through my die cut machine several times to get all of the designs die cut, there was a little more warping of the pattern paper in the end. And so I think the first method actually gave me a cleaner look, but this worked as well. If you want to avoid a little more of the warping, you could use a little bit lighter weight cardstock for your card base, but I'm kind of a paper snob and I like a heavyweight card base. So you're going to see me take my second die here and line it up to where it's overlapping my card front and my card base. Notice that the card front, that pattern paper, is adhered onto the card base. I have not moved that. And I'm going to run it through my die cut machine again. And you may notice that my card base is actually sticking out of the sandwich. Like I mentioned, it's a little wider than the die cut plates or die cutting machine plates. So that is kind of a little concession you have to make. Now at this point, I had ran it through just fine. I did not mess up the edge of my card at all. But the third time that I ran this through, I didn't quite get it centered in the opening of the die cut machine. And I kind of mucked up the edge of my card base just a little. You can see it kind of running into the side of my die cut machine there. It didn't do too much damage. So I was able to remove the die, remove the card front from the card base, and then kind of flatten out that area with my bone folder where I had kind of bent it up just a little bit. And it fared okay. But I think you might notice on this piece of pattern paper, because there had been so much pressure applied to it over and over again, there is just a slight bit of warping around a couple of the edges. Now, I did my best to add some foam adhesive behind it to kind of flatten all that out, but there are some openings on the back of this card front, obviously, where you can kind of see through into that card. So it was kind of hard to flatten that out completely. And that's why I say that I think that the first method actually gave me cleaner results, but both of these methods will work. Now, I'm trying to be efficient in my card making, let's be real. And I thought ahead and I'm like, what do I need a card for? And I needed a card for Father's Day. So I grabbed the Leah's Ornate Uppercase and the Heather's Lowercase alphabets. I grabbed the Uppercase D from Leah's Ornate Uppercase set and the Lowercase A and D from Heather's die set here. And I die cut them from some holographic cardstock. And I adhered those right at the top of that striped area that I created and finished this off with a little embossed sentiment that says, "It's your day." And I grabbed that little sentiment there from the Scripted Bold Sentiments one from Pinkfresh Studio. Now, of course, I'm making a mini slimline card. I would be remiss if I did not show you the coordinating mini slimline envelope that you can create. So I've grabbed some Pinkfresh Studio pattern paper here, and I'm holding this larger die that's a part of the mini slimline envelope die set in place onto this pattern paper with some purple tape. Now, I refer to that piece there, that bigger piece, as the envelope base piece. And this piece with that little angle there, I refer to as the flap piece. So once again, I'm holding that in place on my pattern paper, and I'm going to show you how you can get your patterns to line up when you're die cutting multiple sections of this envelope. So I'm trimming down my pattern paper to about 2 3/8 inch to accommodate this flap piece. And I'm going to automatically trim a second section that's about 2 3/8 inches as well. And I'm going to take these and I'm going to flip one of them over so they're back to back. Because on a pattern paper, if you don't die cut one of these flaps from the back side of the pattern paper, you're going to have one of your flaps going in the wrong direction. So I'm running my base piece through the Gemini Junior to die cut it. You can run it through any die cut machine that you have. And then I am going to fold up the bottom of this envelope along the score line that the die creates. And I'm going to take these 2 strips of pattern paper that I have stacked on top of each other that are back to back. I'm going to adhere them together, and I'm going to take the flap piece of that envelope die set and just do my best to make sure that the bottom part of this die kind of lines up with the pattern that's on the front of this envelope. So I'm just kind of making sure all of that's kind of in generally the same area. Now, this is especially important when you're using something like a striped pattern paper. Now, once I get that where I need it, I'm going to hold it in place on this pattern paper with some purple tape. And remember, I have both of those pieces of pattern paper that I'm going to run through the die cut machine at the same time. So I am cutting the exact same area of this pattern, but I'm cutting one from the back side and one from the front side. And I accomplish that just by flipping one over and having them back to back as I run them through the die cut machine. Now I will fold along the fold lines or the score lines that this die creates. And these are the areas, these little tabs here on the side where you're going to add your adhesive. And I just use some liquid adhesive along that, just a thin bead of that. And I like to kind of position these onto the base of the envelope with that bottom flap kind of folded up. That helps me get it in the right position. So you'll notice the bottom flap of the envelope is kind of folded up, and I'm going to make sure that it kind of goes into that fold line so everything folds over nicely. Now I will take the second flap and add some adhesive to that tab. Once again, line it up with the edge of my base piece for this envelope and make sure that it kind of fits into that lower flap along the bottom. And now I have both of my flaps of the envelope attached to the base. Now, in order to adhere the flaps together, I'm going to just open one of these up and put a thin line of adhesive just on one of these. Now, you don't want to move this too far over or you will glue your envelope closed, but if you keep it right on the edge, you'll be okay. And you can see my pattern lines up pretty well on this envelope here. I also created a striped envelope over on my blog, and I used the same method, and the stripes lined up absolutely perfectly. So I finished my envelope up by adding a little bit of adhesive along that bottom tab and folding it up. And now I have a completed mini slimline envelope that is perfect and coordinates really nicely with this Dad's Day card that I created. I'm just showing you that this slides in there. And this makes for a really fun presentation of a handmade card. I think these coordinating envelopes out of pattern paper are so much fun. And while these patterns don't match exactly, there are colors in that pattern paper that are repeated on my card project as well. So they coordinate nicely. So here's a look at both of the finished projects here. I did add some Pinkfresh Studio jewels here. These are the glacier color. And who says that a Father's Day card can't have some jewels on it? So there you have it, 2 mini slimline cards with continuous die cut pattern that bleeds kind of from that card front onto the card base. I think this is a really fun way to use this mini slimline essentials bundle and create a couple of cards that really have a celebration feel to them. I love the little kind of rainbow bright, rainbow colored detail on these cards that are maybe meant for something a little more masculine, but they just say party to me. And I think by bringing in that kind of geometric pattern paper in the background and some of those geometric details like the circles, the die cut circles on these cards really do kind of bring it back to that masculine feeling card. As always, I will have links to the featured products used in these projects in the description at YouTube. So if you're looking for something in particular, be sure you check there. And thank you so much for stopping by and hanging out with me today and watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you picked up a lot of tips and tricks for creating these mini slimline cards. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe and turn on the notifications here on the Pinkfresh Studio YouTube channel, and leave me a comment below letting me know you enjoyed it. And if you enjoyed it, I would also love it if you would share this video with a friend. As always, thanks again for watching. I'm so glad you're here. And until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day.